Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good lunch. You're in for a fascinating discussion for this next session, since it's relevant not only to people who work in the media, but all those out there looking for real news and information when it...
Адамдар үшін ғана емес, медиа мен медианы тұтынатын адамдар үшін де маңызды. Онлайн сұрақтарыңызға байланысты осы форумның өзінде, егер сұрақтарыңыз болса, қолдарыңызды көтеріңіздер, сұрақтарыңызды іздейміз. Бүгінгі сессиямыздың атауы
For this session, your moderator is the renowned international presenter and Berlin-based TV show host, Ali Aslan.
Thank you so much, Riz, for this very kind introduction. It's a delight to be here at the Eurasian Media Forum and to be moderating this very pertinent, timely session, a session that we as journalists are being confronted with on a daily basis. And I think I speak for all when I say we are all, not just journalists, every one of us, we are all inundated with news on a daily basis. Each of us basically carries their own news agency in their pocket, and from the latest breaking news to countless posts on social media platforms. Even for seasoned journalists such as us, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the sheer quantity of content that is being produced, and frankly speaking, also increasingly difficult to verify what is true and what is not. This session, of course, comes at a time when political polarization and media scrutiny is perhaps at its highest. This is a subject that is extremely essential and relevant for the future of media and journalism and for the currency that we all live off, namely credibility and trust. These are the main currencies that we as journalists speak of and live off, particularly in times of a pandemic. And I couldn't have asked for a more proficient, a more seasoned panel to be discussing this very timely and urgent subject matter. Delighted to welcome Kjell Stein, who's a seasoned communication expert who's been working in international media sales for 20 years. Currently, he's running the German commercial office for Euronews as international sales director. Welcome, Kjell. Very much delighted to hear from you in just a bit. Delighted and so looking forward to hear from and see her. Kseniya Sobchak, who's of course a very prominent Russian TV host. She hosts her own YouTube channel, Kseniya Sobchak, with more than over 2 million followers. And I probably butchered that name right there, the pronunciation of it. Nonetheless, I think her prominence speaks for herself. Also delighted to welcome here on stage Ahmet Yesiltepe, who is truly one of Turkey's leading television journalists, an award-winning TV journalist based in Istanbul and currently the foreign news manager of the Turkish 24-hour news channel NTV. Also with us is Anastasia Novikova. She's an award-winning journalist based in Kazakhstan and the editor-in-chief of Informburo, which is widely known here in Kazakhstan, of course, and by our audience members, I'm sure. Delighted to be joined live from London. Todd Baer is joining us. He's an award-winning journalist joining us from London today and based in London. He's the global director at Bloomberg. Lovely to have you with us, Todd. And last but certainly not least, we have Sergey Kiselyov with us. He's the general director of Channel 1 Eurasia here in Kazakhstan. So once again, I want to reiterate what Riz Khan has already laid out. You are not just, you're just not an audience, you're also participants. So I want you to participate with your question throughout, and of course, your online question, which I'm happy to incorporate into the session. I want to make this session as lively and interactive as can be. So I would, before yielding the floor to you for some preliminary opening remarks, ask you to be short. Don't worry, we will make numerous rounds. Don't feel you have to get everything in at the first time. Kjell, you're up. Looking forward to hear from you. The microphone, I think, maybe.
Sorry.
There you go.
Here we go.
There
Thank
you
you,
go.
Ali. Well, the problem we face today Clickbait headlines, distorted information, inflammatory statements, altered images, conspiracy theories, and fake news all over the internet can lead to the manipulation of people on a grand scale. We've seen it during elections, we've seen it during Brexit, we've seen it during the recent pandemic. It seems that everywhere one turns to these days, one encounters fake news. However, and this is important, it is not fake just because a former president calls stuff fake news, or because of one's own imagination. The amount of actual fake news or fake information has skyrocketed, has exploded, because fake news is easy to make and easy to spread. Anyone can put stories online with no journalistic integrity or editorial oversight. Before the internet, most individuals could not get a message to people out using mass media because it was simply too expensive. With social media, the spread of disinformation no longer costs anything, doesn't cost a dime. Why? Because other people pass it along for you. And people share if they like it, if the headline fits their worldview, without actually reading the article or less verifying the authenticity of its content. So the problem is that some people, this is a harsh description, but are ill-equipped to understand what is in their news feeds. They easily accept the information being presented to them on the social media platforms and elsewhere, and are thus being manipulated for profit or political gain, without being aware of it, I should add. Another effect of being flooded with lies is that for people, information presented by established media that was once accepted truthworthy and reliable is now being questioned, often dismissed as untrue and disregarded by many people because it differs from the news they just read, viewed, listened somewhere online. Disinformation coupled with information overload leads people to be overwhelmed. I think this is a common sentiment in this room. And consequently, people are reluctant to verify the information they receive. And it is too much trouble for everyone to check the sources of the stories being posted. I would say, Ali, that is how misinformation continues to circulate unchecked and has a snowball effect.
Absolutely, Kjell. Thank you so much for your opening remarks. Indeed, it is very hard to verify, even for experienced, seasoned journalists such as ourselves, the rapid speed that is with which the news are spreading. It is really hard to check out there, and sometimes unintentionally, we as journalists, perhaps each of us here on stage or in the audience, have been at fault of spreading or sharing fake news only to be retracted later on. So thank you so much, Kjell, for pointing out the challenges that each of us are facing. Of course, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment, but first, Kseniya, I want to hear from you. Obviously, you are a well-known media personality in Russia. You have a huge following, which brings with it, of course, huge responsibilities to get the facts straight. Looking forward to hear from you.
Мне кажется, важнейшую тему мы сегодня обсуждаем, потому что фейк-ньюс – это действительно такая новая реальность, в которой мы все оказались. В чем ужас этой ситуации? Что независимо от того, что через несколько дней какая-то новость признается фейком, совершенно понятно, что это как в той поговорке, сейчас синхронисту будет сложно, ложки нашлись, а осадочек остался. Такая информация, она в любом случае вредит репутации просто по факту ее произнесения, независимо от того, что потом она дезавуируется, так сказать, знание, которое в тебя уже попало, нельзя из тебя достать. Это знание начинает формировать реальность, формировать твое отношение к тем или иным людям, и это уже, к сожалению, не изменить. Что же с этим делать и как вообще бороться с фейк-ньюс? Ну, здесь, мне кажется, речь идет, наверное, о том, что каждый журналист делает, как вот вы правильно сказали, в меру своей ответственности и в меру того, насколько он стремится к тому, чтобы те материалы, которые он выпускал, новостные или какие-то еще, соответствовали определенным стандартам. Ну, вот действительно, наверное, упрощение всего. Например, мы сейчас, если говорим о Ютубе, то, конечно, то, как делается контент в Ютубе, отличается от того, как он делается на большом телевидении. И с точки зрения того, что это меньше людей, проще съемка, если шнур оператора попадет в кадр, вроде бы ничего страшного. Но вот если мы говорим о моем канале, помимо интервью, у меня там есть новостные выпуски, то я при этом никогда не жалею денег на отдельного человека, который занимается факт-чекингом, и мы очень серьезно относимся, очень профессионально относимся к тем новостям, которые мы каждую неделю поставляем. Что здесь важно понимать? Почему лично я имею оптимизм по поводу всей проблемы фейк-ньюс? Потому что помните те времена, когда появились первые автомобили? Тогда еще люди ездили на лошадях, на каретах, и на улицах был сумбур, да, уже начали ездить машины, при этом тут же где-то лошадь перебегала, кто-то шел с повозкой, и, в общем, регламентировать все это было довольно сложно. Но чем больше становилось машин, чем больше развивался прогресс, появились правила, светофоры, лошади постепенно ушли с дорог. Вот я надеюсь, что в ситуации с фейк-ньюс произойдет примерно следующее. Сейчас за счет того, что интернет дал нам сразу такой объем вот этой вот странной информации, и не все еще имеют привычку ее проверять, любят выслать друг другу смешную картинку просто потому, что она смешная и соответствует их мировоззрению, а надо понимать, что фейк-ньюс зачастую делают профессиональные люди, именно зная, на что нажимать, как манипулировать людьми, то, конечно же, это все быстро распространяется. Но я верю в то, что как это в свое время происходило на уровне газет, где мы точно понимали, что есть Sun, а есть New York Times, мы точно понимали, что это желтая пресса, а это качественная. Также будет происходить и в интернете, и уже происходит с изданиями. И это то, на что лично моя редакция делает ставку. Когда раз за разом эти фейки будут разоблачаться, за несколько лет, я надеюсь, он уже формируется, вот этот рынок качественных новостей, когда люди будут понимать, что вот этим порталам можно доверять, их информация проверена, и там никогда не появится ничего сомнительного. А все, что приходит новое, будоражащее и, в общем, какая-то невероятная бомбическая история, но которая почему-то размещена на маленьком неизвестном портале, и никто на нее не ссылается, это будет вот фейк просто по факту вот этого первого существования. И мне кажется, что это правильная ситуация, которая только сейчас формируется, она будет развиваться, и я верю в то, что в этом смысле человеческий разум победит.
Thank you so much. So you're rather optimistic that in the end both quality and fact-checking will prevail, a bit like traffic rules for journalism, which we will need at the end of the day. It'll be interesting to see, of course, if that optimism prevails, because at the end of the day, and I speak for all, I think the need for quality and reliable news was never higher than in times of a pandemic. These days, it's really almost an issue of life and death rather than annoyance and disturbance. So thank you so much, Kseniya, for kicking this off. Now off to Ahmet. Ahmet Yesiltepe, delighted to hear from you. You're based in Istanbul, Turkey, and bringing a whole set of new experiences and perspectives with you. Ahmet, looking forward to hear from you.
Hello again. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee of Eurasian Media Forum for invitation to this visionary and valuable meeting. So the title of this, I believe, already set to visit the beautiful city of Nur Sultan. My colleagues almost convinced me that I must fly to Almaty instead of Nur Sultan, because that's where the meeting was really taking place, according to social media. I actually had to go back and fact-check what I already knew to be true. The regard for information on social media is astonishing. This is not just an issue for today's media world, actually. It is a phenomenon that extends in many fields, from politics to economics, from health to international relations, and has become the topic that we discuss the most as media professionals. Lots of information and a little truth. My purpose to discuss the topics that are all the center of the global center concern, to share and understand different experiences, and also to share my personal experience as a media professional and a senior manager. I would like to present where our problems are clustered and share alternative solutions. Therefore, as we continue discussions of media at the global level, the session, I would like to give examples from home country, Turkey, one of the world's most important crossroads, I believe, and then all of the stories are true, and many of them are among the most recent problems we face. With the spread of social media channels and the reputational loss of corporate journalism, unfortunately, it is expressed by many thinkers that we live in post-truth era, where ideas people believe to be true become more significant than scientific findings or objective opinions. Fake news, on the other hand, has long become one of the important elements that set the agenda. A kind of engineering managing the whole terrible process of disinformation, manipulation, fake news, deep fake, lynching campaigns with bots, empty political debates initiated by trolls, agenda topics fueling polarization, such as anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-vaccine, and then perception management and hate speech. So unfortunately, this engineering is spreading like cancer that gradually destroys the sense of trust in almost every part of society.
Thank you so much indeed. A very important point, Ahmet, that you pointed out. It spreads like cancer and undermines the trust that the public out there have in institutions that we represent. And the credibility, as I said, going in the very beginning, is our ultimate, if not only an essential currency that we have. Once that's gone, there's very little left. Thank you so much, Ahmet, for pointing out the urgency. I will come back to you, of course, as we make our way through, but now delighted to hear from Anastasia, who's an award-winning journalist based here in Kazakhstan. A bit of a home play for you. This is home turf. Looking forward to hear from you, Anastasia.
I'll speak Russian, okay? Дело в том, что вы говорите.
So, you know, the thing is that, as you said, Western journalism has been facing fake news for a while now and has drawn some conclusions and learned some lessons. But I think that in Kazakhstan, this problem became urgent during the pandemic. Because before that wasn't really in our backyard, that was somewhere else, and we were just looking at it as spectators. But as the world has changed and the pandemic came, certainly we no longer were an exception to that phenomenon. And I just want to ask everyone to think about why fake news appear and why people believe it. There are some absurdities mentioned, but somehow people still believe into absurd things. There was a big story here in Kazakhstan when a famous blogger, an athlete, a wrestler, was quite seriously telling his audience that the virus is spread by the helicopters. And he actually urged them to shoot down those helicopters, to shoot the people doing disinfection on the street. But fortunately, this went nowhere. But he was punished, of course, for spreading that. And then, after his punishment term was over, I looked at his Instagram, and he actually continued to propagate the same things, although in maybe a more ambiguous manner. And there were hundreds of likes, hundreds of comments in support of this person. Also, when Kazakhstan started vaccination, I think that many countries noticed the same phenomenon, but when vaccination campaigns started, there were suddenly a lot of fake news about vaccination, like trying to insert chips into people's bodies, or about inability to have children after vaccination, and many, many other things. And this sounds very foolish for adult, educated people, but then look at who's actually propagating these things and who's sharing it. These are often adult, educated people. We need to look into reasons of why this is happening. And you probably have seen some of the researchers saying that there are two reasons for that. Why do we have fake news and fake information? First, because there is lack of true information. When people don't have any information and they just resort to imagining something. Or the second thing is when you're triggered somehow, when something affects yourself, your children, your loved ones, your work, your community, your country. So when two of these factors coincide, then the fake news become viral. But to add to this list of reasons, I would say that we need to mention one more reason, an important one. In my opinion, it's also about the educational level throughout the world. Although the universities are still there, but I think that people, especially from the older generations, will notice that in some cases the quality of education, the level of education is falling. Sometimes even professional doctors, those who went to med schools, there are still doctors that are resisting the vaccines and are ready to wash them down the sink to avoid getting a shot. This is a serious issue. And I think that to fight fake news, we need to fight the root causes of them. Thank you.
In order to fight the root causes, indeed, interesting for me to hear that fake didn't seem to be a big problem here in this part of the world, didn't seem to be in Kazakhstan. Kseniya, I see you already have a quick intervention. How quick is it? Otherwise, I'm going to get through. I'll give you a minute to respond to what Anastasia was saying, and then we move on to Todd. Go ahead.
Нет, я просто хотела добавить.
I just wanted to add that the only thing I disagree with is that educational level is going down. We just have to put up that we always have had enough people with poor educational backgrounds. In the past, those people were walking quietly, but the pandemic brought them on the surface, gave them platform to communicate their great messages to the exterior world. To my mind, the proportion between the people who read the versatile mass media and fake news has not changed, except of the fact that the pandemic made that inequality more obvious.
They brought a lot of things to light, none the least the emergence in this part of the world, from what I understand, of fake news. But education, and Kseniya, you touched upon it, I think education is one of the key words, namely, how do you teach media literacy? How do you teach someone to distinguish between what is fake and what is not, when even seasoned, experienced journalists like us sometimes have difficulties distinguishing between them? Very interesting question. We will pick up on that in just a moment, but let's go from Nur Sultan to London and go to Todd Baer from Bloomberg. Todd, delighted to have you with us. Connection is looking good. Looking forward to hear from you.
Ali, thanks very much. It's good to see you again. Many people may not know that Ali, Aslan, and I started our careers at ABC News around 1998 together. A great brand, a great news brand, where journalism at the time was paramount, and the definition of journalism was, fact-checking and responsibility, and there wasn't any social media, and there weren't any smartphones. We had a little thing called abcnews.com at the time, which didn't work so well, and very few people paid attention to it. So times have certainly changed massively in the last 20 some odd years since Ali and I started at ABC News in New York. And I think today, as we said, there's a lot of information and little truth. There's a lot of noise out there. And for me, as a journalist, a former reporter who spent 17 years covering the news, I'm no longer doing that today. I think it's about the news brands. I tell people, if you really want to know what's going on in the world, read the Wall Street Journal, read Bloomberg, read the New York Times, read the Financial Times, and you'll understand what's going on across the board. Now, as we talked about media literacy, as a journalist, I often want to know who's writing the story. I read the byline. I mean, I study the newspaper, and most people don't. But I look when I'm reading the New York Times and I see the byline of Tom Friedman, I know what I'm getting. When I see Gerard Baker in the Wall Street Journal, I know what I'm getting. But the reality is most people don't do this, and they get their news from social media, from Twitter, and they can't decipher what is real and what is not. And I think we do need media literacy in the schools and teaching young people from the earliest time of their education how to determine what is real, what is not. And then we need like a generation of young journalists to get into the business and to practice more and more responsibility. But Ali, if I may, later on, I do want to take up the advantages of citizen journalism and social media with an experience of last year. Probably the most compelling video that I've seen in my life in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Most definitely. I believe you're referring to the tragic death and the consequences of what unfolded of George Floyd in Minnesota back there. Delighted to hear about that in just a moment. Stand by, Todd. Great to see you indeed. When you and I started out at ABC News 20 plus years ago, it was a different world, hard to believe. No smartphones.
We're old now. We're too old now.
Well, yeah, that too, that's quite apparent, though you look much younger than I do these days. You've held up quite well. But aside from that, aside from physical appearances, I think it's quite clear that it was a different brand of journalism back then. And indeed, media literacy and citizen journalism, all new aspects that weren't obviously a term and a label and a concept back then. Happy to hear more from you, Todd, in just a moment. Let's go to Sergey now, who also very much like Anastasia is based here in Kazakhstan. Looking forward to hear from you.
My dear colleagues, it seems to me that at present we are discussing one part of the fake information. We call it straightforward fake, the pure fake news, but still I wanted to give it a more expanded definition. It seems to me fake information is any information created with the intention to tell lies, to tell something false about what is going on planet Earth for own benefits, for dissemination of certain ideology and concepts. So if to approach fake news from this particular standpoint, I have to tell us that fakes exist and they shall proceed to do so. But if we give it a wider definition, this is a manipulation instrument used by bigger mass media, including governmental mass media, for the benefit of the government. Private mass media use fake news for the benefits of their sponsors and stakeholders. And this type of activity for the benefit of your government, some people call it propaganda, enemies call it disinformation. Also, governmental bodies in many countries actively work in social network. We know about that. They create the so-called pot farms, special subdivisions, probably under the auspices of secret services, who are disseminating the necessary information in social platforms. This is a very sophisticated, very highly refined activity, which is performed by very clever, very literate people. I think it makes no sense to discuss those people now. Let's talk about day-to-day primitive fake news, what I call the straightforward news, pure lies. How do we struggle it? Very often I get approached by many people with requests, people about whom some lies were disseminated in social networks. They ask me for advice. What should I do? Earlier, my advice would be inert, do nothing. I would tell them about the Streisand effect, about the mental understanding. A peculiar thing about our mentality is that if you're trying to justify yourself, you are guilty by default. And because of big audience they have, social platforms enjoy great popularity. You see, a lot of people do not read messages, fake messages, but they resend them. This is like a nuclear reaction. So my recommendation to victims of fake news is to confront those fake news, do it actively, proactively, confront the fake news. And your confrontation messages shall be seen in social platforms, in social networks. And if there are clever people among the audiences, they will appreciate the alternative source of information and alternative arguments. Anybody who is clever shall always appreciate alternative sources. Mrs. Balaeva has already said today that we need further legislative regulation of the behaviors of people in cyberspace. Reasonable regulation, I would call it. Probably victims need some help. Probably we are talking about influencing the fake news, maybe deleting the fake news in mandatory order. But the other side of the medal is the responsibility imposed on the people distributing fake information or authors of fake news. We need some legal action. To my mind, that's the only way out. And I do agree with Kseniya that in future, public relations, they always run ahead of legal framework. So now we see the booming development of various social relations in mobile platforms, social networks, and all of those things are not properly regulated in legal field. This is upcoming. And after that, the order will be established. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A passionate plea to regulate, which of course is a very tricky thing depending on which country you're at, but to regulate the content online in order to prevent what you call the real fake news. Namely, we're not talking here at the end of the day about a matter of difference of opinions. We're not talking about some interpretations, different interpretations of the same event, of a spin maybe, of framed news. We're talking about, as I understand you correctly, what you are condemning and want to regulate artificially created news, sometimes even government-sponsored and promoted. Indeed, yeah, that is a huge issue, and thank you for broadening the horizon, because at the end of the day, there's a famous quote which has been, interestingly enough, attributed to many people. I believe it is from former US Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who says, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. But I think this is, Kjell, this is where we are already getting into muddled waters these days in these polarized times. Namely, your facts may differ from mine. What is truth? Not to get all philosophical, too philosophical here on the panel, but that is at the heart of the debate, isn't it? What is true to you may not be true to me, and the pandemic has very, very much brought this to the forefront, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and facts are facts. There are no alternative facts. And I think when we talk about media literacy, back in 2016, I was giving a talk at a university, at a local university in Berlin, and we were talking about country branding. And obviously, we were talking about perception of certain countries, etc., and we were talking on where people read certain stories, etc. And when I asked, the classroom, so where were your sources? The reply was Facebook. And that is basically what Todd said. It's difficult to decipher these days where, people consume what kind of news unless you are news savvy, and therefore I think, I totally agree, we need media literacy. And opinions, that of course needs to be debated, but the problem we face is that a lot of the news outlets are moving into opinionated stories. And I think this is a big problem we face today.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very, if you look at what is happening indeed, and I think every journalist here can attest to that, that it used to be the reporting and opinion, or facts and editorial, used to be neatly separated. You definitely knew what you were getting, Kseniya. These days, it's you read an article and 2 sentences in, you pretty much know where it's headed.
Ровно так, и это тоже огромный.
Yes, it is a big problem. People want to receive information, any storytelling through the prism of their own experience. They want to hear to somebody's personal opinion. And when I was a student in journalism, I had just one choice. It's either a template written by my editor-in-chief or my own creativity. Today, we are facing a far more serious problem, which is fake news. And that problem is associated with democracy, regardless how odd it might sound. What are we fighting for in Russia? Although it is pretty much complicated to struggle for democracy in Russia, for the civilized democracy, for some kind of system in which the majority shall rule. But the whole situation with social media, with the distribution of the information people absorb so voluptuously, make us ask another question: is it so good when the dominating majority rules? I don't have the answer, because I am definitely a person who is against any form of dictatorship. I've been fighting dictatorship in my country for many years. In my country, the internet regulation is supposed to make the life of the government more comfortable, not the life of the users of the internet. We are not discussing the problems directly. We are using problems to retain the power. And that is not a normal situation when you don't have the presumption of innocence. When in your country it does not matter if you have proven something in the court of justice. Johnny Depp case is a wonderful proof for my message. Any trend may be interpreted under a certain angle, and you have nothing to offer to confront it. People who have knowledge, people who have professionalism, people who love good quality information always constitute the minority at all times. And if we are taking the trail of the dominating majority in mass media, here's a good example. We had debates in my television channel, and it was a discovery for my own self. We located 2 science doctors. One was ready to struggle for the statement that vaccination is evil. So it was quite a scientific debate we arranged. And they referred to facts, to numerous sources of information. And this individual is telling us that vaccination is evil, and the second man is confronting his standpoint using scientific information. So who do you think won the debate? Who do you think was the winner? Still, the majority of people voted for non-vaccination, unfortunately. So what is so terrorizing about it. You can be extremely scientific. You can bring a whole portfolio of various facts, but the opinion of the dominating majority shall remain the same. They will like what they like. What is the problem about it? The problem is far more deeper. If you promise people easier way in policy and economics, they will follow you. And does not pertain to only mass media, that pertains to the whole planet of Earth where we all live.
On a very, very important point, namely the issue and problem of echo chambers. People at this particular point do want their own opinion reiterated by the journalists that they follow. And if you don't do that, you go someplace else. I think we've seen that polarization very much in the United States during the 4 years of Trump, where it depended on whether you were pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and that was the channel, CNN or Fox News, that you would follow and only follow, because that would reiterate your belief. And Ahmet, that is indeed a problem, isn't it? At the end of the day, we are trying to be, at least that is our aim, to be objective.
Definitely, you're right. Actually, polarization, when we talk about the polarization, I would like to mention about, Turkey's political current situation. Actually, especially on social media, we have good fightings. So I have some facts and figures I would like to share, if it is possible.
Of course, facts are always good.
Okay, the issue of fake news discussed in the context of traditional media has become a larger problem, and as the new media increase its influence, there are serious discussions on this issue at the global and national level. According to the study by a group of scientists from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in 2018, the rate of reaching 1,500 people for a fake or fake post news on Twitter is 6 times more than a correct post. Kind of engineering, actually I have one more interesting figures. Another remarkable finding is that the rate of retweeting a fake post among users is 70% higher than a correct post. Politics is the most attractive area for intensive sharing of our information. So when it comes to politics, politicians see the solution as increasing the legal obstacles in social media. In fact, it's a fact that spreading false information is done in polarized countries like Turkey to dominate the opinions of the group they belong to and spread manipulative information against a common enemy. False information breeds discrimination and hate speech and misinformation for political purposes. Technology supported bots and troll activities that feed the spread of misinformation are also used for political purposes. Research shows that there has been 150% increase in the number of countries where trolls and bots are used for political propaganda in the last 3 years. So with this method, it becomes easier and more possible to believe in organized propaganda on social media. The real problem is in the misinformation that is deliberately produced and served. The existence and spread of this information with the political targets is too big problem in Turkey to be attributed to a certain segment politics. We can also talk about the economics of the fake of news production. Some comprehensive academic studies were conducted in which the fake news produced with the economic concerns as well in traditional media was evaluated. In order to promote companies via this model, the reputation of the rival company was damaged, consumers were deceived, misleading information was given about the product, and certain industries were targeted. This situation found a very widespread arena, especially in the digital environments. In academic studies and of the uncontrolled, spontaneous spread of any video, it also has been revealed that this is a marketing technique. While the videos that are consciously prepared in line with certain goal reach millions by presenting them as if they were prepared in uncontrolled manner, companies allocate funds for viral content. These fake news prepared for economic and or political reasons in order to direct the target audience and produce subconscious effects are served especially on social media platforms, and then these contents are discussed as if they were real in traditional media. At this point, lastly, we journalists have of course, great responsibilities. There are completed media organizations that are set up purely for fact-checking first. And one of them is the institution I work for at NTV, with a team that I have informed at Foreign News Desk. We undertake to exclude fake news and misleading content, and not to include them in our content, in our own content. For this purpose, our team catches fake and manipulated news with the method we call fake news detection. Later on, I will talk about some legal laws that the government tried to set it up, and I will talk it later on.
Yeah, absolutely, Ahmet, and thank you for pointing out the fact that I think not a single news organization in this day and age can do without fact-checking team, fact-checking tools. It has become the bread and butter, really, of Euronews or whatever. You know, you're out there and you have to verify the news, Anastasia, because I think it's one thing has become clear throughout this discussion, and we're already an hour in. It seems very clear that fake news, or as Sergey called them, real fake news, the fabricated, the artificial, the ones with real cruel intentions, are not just undermining our authority, but they're really eating away of the social fabric of a society and thus democracy.
Did you ask to me?
Вы знаете, к моему...
You know, unfortunately, what I think is that I wouldn't try to subdivide now different sources of information into conventional and non-conventional, like the traditional media and the blogs and so on, because we all know that there are many news outlets right now that actually also print or publish fake news. Why is that the case? Partially because of what Sergey has mentioned, because of propaganda or because some hidden agenda, and maybe that's an excuse for some outlets. But we also understand that right now, when we are talking about the internet, regardless, we are all now focused on the number of views, because that leads to advertising budgets, that leads to a good life of the news outlet. And unfortunately, many outlets, well, I don't know if I can say many or not, but some are using these instruments and are trying to increase their ratings by doing so. And I think that in this case, I don't like the word censorship, and I don't like this internal censorship concept, but I just don't know how to put it in other words. We need to differentiate between the truth and the fake. We need to actually think what we can publish and what we cannot, and distinguish between the facts and the opinions. For instance, vaccination efforts are a fact. But a doctor who says that the woman becomes infertile because of vaccination, that is an opinion, and you need to think whether you need to publish this opinion. I don't think it's about the regulatory policy coming top down. It's probably about self-regulation, and then we can do something with it. Because otherwise we're all in the same boat and we cannot do anything with it.
Kseniya, 60 seconds.
Да, я просто
Yes, I just wanted to add a short remark as a follow-up. I think that, prohibiting something will lead us nowhere. It's always a bad decision, but we all realize that we need to do something. And I would actually like to hear what other people think. Maybe it's about, establishing some kind of a quality seal, saying that certain outlet complies with a code of conduct or journalism principles. So it's not about prohibiting, but actually differentiating. There are always some real medicines or some traditional medicines. Like to get a medicine into a pharmacy, you have to undergo a clear quality process and you have to comply with certain requirements. So let's look at journalism as a kind of a pharmacy, and we'll know that somewhere out there are those, herbal medicines and whatever cook at home. But on the other hand, we'll know that there are good quality pharmacies, and we'll decide whether we want this herbal medicine or we really want true certified content.
Of course, the term journalist is not protected. You're of course right. Everybody, every blogger out there, everyone with an iPhone and a camera can call themselves a journalist, or a certificate, if you will, a certificate or a certified journalist. It's an interesting thought, of course. How easy it is to actually implement it in reality is a different issue. But I think now that we're approaching the final 30-minute mark of this debate, you have provided a nice segue, namely, yes, throughout the first hour we've talked about what is wrong, the status quo, to determine how detrimental fake news is, and I think we all are in agreement. But the issue, of course, is in the final 30 minutes, and I understand we also have some questions from the audience which I want to incorporate, is the way forward, how to fix this. Is there a fix? Todd, I want to bring you in again. You talked about citizenship, citizen journalism as one way. Are there any remedies here that you see that we as journalists, as news organizations, can prevent and curtail the spread of fake news?
Well, first off, Wally, I agree with Kseniya. I think, firmly believe the social media platforms should be regulated much like Ofcom regulates broadcasters in the United Kingdom, or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, regulates broadcasters in the United States. I think that's one answer, that the social media platforms should be regulated. But one thing I want to point out is, we've talked about the danger of fake news and social media and digital media, but one thing we should touch on is, what if the information is real and it didn't come from, say, the New York Times or Bloomberg or the Financial Times or Euronews, some of these great brands that are so trusted? What if it's real, like in May of 2020, when a 17-year-old girl named Darnella Frazier shot some video as a citizen journalist? Now, I've been criticizing citizen journalism for years, saying, look, we don't have citizen doctors, we don't have citizen lawyers, we don't have citizen pilots. Why would we have citizen journalists? But on this given day, the end of May 2020, Darnella Frazier, 17-year-old girl, was there with a smartphone, and she captured what for me was the most compelling and disturbing video I have ever seen in my life, which was the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. Now, I feel like I can talk authoritatively on this because I covered the Minneapolis Police Department for 5 years, from 2002 to 2007. And so, had it not been for Darnella Frazier on that given day, shooting video of a Minneapolis police officer killing George Floyd, kneeling on his neck for over 8 minutes, if it had not been for her and the social media platform which amplified it, Facebook, that story would never have gotten out. I know for sure, and I wrote about this on AlJazeera.com. I know for sure that story would have been covered up. The traditional news media would have missed the video. The police department would have covered it up. In fact, they tried to cover it up with a press release saying that George Floyd died from, some other, whatever. There were other circumstances, drug use, whatever it was. And then they would have stonewalled the media. The media would have tried to follow up, but they wouldn't have had the video, and it would have gone away. So there is an advantage. My point is there is a big advantage to the social media, the digital platforms. But I do, again, agree with Kseniya that there needs to be some regulation to platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platform.
Yeah, interesting. Also, very much like Anastasia and Kseniya calling for regulation, calling for certificates, for lack of a better term, to make sure that, it is whatever is out there. Todd, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I think the problem, Ali, is who makes the certificate? Who is the regulator?
Exactly.
And this is where it gets controversial. And so, because there's so much, everything is open now. Whoever does the regulation could be criticized for being biased or for being favorable to one political party or another or a government. So it's a very, very difficult thing to manage. But certainly, I do believe we need to be having this conversation about regulation of the social media platforms.
Very interesting conversation that is unfolding here. I can really delighted to go up. I do want to bring in, I know, Kseniya, you had your hands up. I do want to bring in Sergey for a moment. I come to you, Kseniya, and then, of course, I'm also going to bring in the questions we've been getting online. Sergey, you're up.
Ali, you mentioned the truth and, thinking about what the truth is. And my opinion is that the truth is often very subjective because, let's say, a statement saying that a woman is violating some ethics because she wears provocative clothes might not be the truth for Europeans, but it might be the truth for, let's say, people in Afghanistan. So everyone has their own truth, and in many instances, it's subjective. And I think that our mission as mass media is to present people with different opinions and positions. And yes, we do need to counter fake news, but we can counter it by presenting a different angle, a different point of view. And it's then up to the reader to make a decision, because we cannot decide for them. And there were some examples when well-educated people, seems intelligent people, but still are publishing some weird information about this coronavirus being sprayed by the helicopters and so on. And you cannot do anything with this person. No restrictions, no prohibitions will change his opinion. So far, we have not created a tool. No one can offer a regulatory instrument because there are still many outstanding questions. Maybe in the future, the society will find answers. But right now, I believe the job of mass media is to provide people with many different points of view, and then it's up to the reader to decide what the truth is.
The tricky thing is, and of course I feel you, Sergey, I think it starts right there. Once we as mass media, quote unquote, provide these views, already we're on a slippery slope, because what is perspectives to us, again, what is the truth, might be contested by others. We're seeing it. We see people living in the same country and having two completely different perspectives on the political situation, on their leader, on what is going on the economy. I think the schizophrenia that we're seeing in many countries, where we are indeed separated by opinion and therefore choose our news outlets in order to be reiterated and confirmed in our belief, I think that is a huge challenge going ahead. Kseniya.
Yes, just a short comment. I think that the only, thing about presenting different positions, I think it won't work so easy because the algorithms in the mass media are set up in a way that when you are looking up for a certain kind of information, then the algorithm will suggest you similar types of information. And that's, I think, what happened in the US. So it doesn't work this way that when you're presented with many different points of view, you'll get more information. No, as soon as you start Googling something, like when I was getting ready for this discussion, I, of course, started looking into different issues. I Googled anti-vaxxers, and then I got this information for several months. You know, they were just suggesting me different things because I Googled anti-vaxxers. So it won't work that easy. And also in relation to what we were saying about this, some kind of certificate or seal of quality, of course, this is just a raw idea. I'm not talking about some real certificates, but maybe there could be a way to create some kind of well-recognized global community consisting of some outlets, and they will just monitor whether everyone complies with some standards like fact-checking of information, even some primitive tools that we are well aware of. Fact-checking, verifying the information, correct ways to verify the information, and then maybe if some outlet has published fake news for several times, maybe that could become an issue for them, like they will lose some kind of a star on their rating or some kind of a seal or certificate, and maybe they will be considered less reliable. But there is no contradiction here with citizen journalism, with this teenage girl who recorded Floyd's murder. I think that still this will continue. Those people will still be out there. They will still be able to shoot their videos, send it to some news outlets, and then the news outlets can do their fact-checking, their verification, whether it's authentic video, and then both the girl will get her 15 minutes of fame, but this information will also be checked and verified by other large outlets who have enough resources to verify the information, and then they will just quote the girl and then send the information out there. Kseniya, you know, I would still insist that we need to give people multiple points of view, because when somebody else decides for us what we are reading or what we are looking, and we had that in the past when there were only books in the libraries that were approved by someone in the Soviet Union, and we all lived through it, and many of our Western colleagues haven't lived in it, but we do know what it is, and we don't want to go back to that situation. So we cannot choose for our audience what they're reading or what they're listening to. It's up to them.
Ali, if I can jump in there real quick.
Of course.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yes. Just look, when we were at ABC News 20 some odd years ago, the anchor of World News Tonight, Peter Jennings, I always remember him saying, "There is no essential truth in the world." He looks at one side of a coin and he wants to flip it over to make sure it shows what he believes it shows. He needs to turn the stone over. When I, as an American journalist, coming up through the ranks of ABC and CNN and local news in the United States, I then went to Al Jazeera English, and they had a different version of the truth, if you will. And I learned that, you know, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And I learned about telling stories from east to west, as opposed to from Washington projecting out to the rest of the world. So, you know, finding the truth is very, very difficult, and it's different for different people.
And indeed, once again, I do come back, and I do want to take some questions that have been reaching us online. The truth, it's a very loaded word, of course, but at the end of the day, as Todd was saying, the truth to someone at Al Jazeera, running Al Jazeera, might be completely different to someone running at ABC News. We have some online questions. I do want to bring them in. We have 20 minutes left in this very heated debate already. We're in the midst of it and not nearly done, but do want to get some voices out there.
Our first online question is, could a news aggregator run by journalists rather than AI and algorithms provide a better perspective?
News aggregator rather than AI, run by journalists rather than AI. Looking does anybody want to, do we have any takers? I know Anastasia and Sergey, I think. Go ahead.
Я думаю, вряд ли.
I don't think so. I don't think that it can do a better job, because it's also a question of what you consider to be a better job. What is the criterion? Because the personal opinions of the journalists will affect what they aggregate, and it will be their truth, not the algorithm. And algorithms can be set up in different ways, like Kseniya said, in social media, you could also change the way the algorithm works. It's about setting it up, and the question is who's setting it up? I would add that, you know, there is such a big amount of information right now in the world that to read everything we want to read is no longer possible. We don't even know. Maybe there are people out there that we would like, but we... And in this situation, based on the interest of the readers, I think the algorithm can do a better job. It's like with advertisement. We all know that the TV advertisement is the most expensive, but it isn't the most effective. When you're opening YouTube, for instance, you get the advertisement that you need, and there is some logic behind it, I think.
60 seconds.
I think that a journalist will not save the situation because he'll only reflect his personal opinion. But there is a different angle to it. AI belongs to private companies, and it's no longer about the democracy, it's about the private property. And some private company sets up an AI to get maximum profits. And big companies can get these profits if they retain the attention of the audience, because the more people look something up on their website or their platform, the more money, let's say, Facebook can get. So that's what these AIs focus on. And then, as journalists, we understand that the best way to grab the attention of a person is to present this person with negative information. For instance, if you publish a piece of news that a dog bit a man, no one is interested. But if you say a man bit a dog, this can become news. So I think it's at the nexus with private property laws. And then we either need to say that, okay, you cannot do this because that impacts our whole world. And, you know, the way the TV functioned in the past, we understood that there is some TV mainline channel and we push the buttons and we can turn different channels, be it in Russia or the US, whatever. So you just switched the channels and you knew that one channel is pretty good, but on the other channel you'll only watch soap operas. But today the same approach doesn't work. So I think it's about this nexus with private property. Can we dictate the way the algorithms are set up? Can we force someone to present high quality content first instead of grabbing the attention of the audience?
I think whether it's an algorithm or a person, the bottom line is I think you have to go to different news sources. You can have the algorithm aggregated feed, but you have to go to different news sources, different newspapers, different television channels. And you have to have a wide variety in what I would describe as your media diet. And it also comes back to media literacy. How can you determine what is the truth, even though the truth is pretty much elusive globally?
Yeah, the doctor always prescribes 5 different vegetables a day. So I think maybe we can apply this to the media as well. Take 5 sources every day and then create your own little dish. Ahmet and then Kjell.
I should add something to Sergey. I completely, 100% agree with him. That if you have algorithms, you can change it, yes. But I just wonder that the blockchain technology is coming, you know, that on blockchain technology in the near future, the fight against false news and information, you know, that's for blockchain technology, which produces immutable and irrefutable and completely transparent results. Some experts are looking at it as a promising option. Just I want to add this.
Yeah.
Blockchain technology.
Thank you so much. Kjell?
Well, really, picking on what Todd said, the problem is that the truth is boring sometimes, and manipulation is sexy. And I think this is a problem we face, and we're going to continue to face.
Thank you so much. We have. Go ahead, Todd.
My bosses, when I was in local news, always told me my job was to entertain and inform, and in that order.
Entertain and inform. Truly spoken like an American journalist. But yeah, I mean, the issue, of course, it is, and with that, I want to do the segue to the next online question. It is also, and perhaps this is also a time to be taught, to be self-reflective and perhaps even self-critical about clickbait headlines, about making news perhaps more sensationalistic than they have to be. We've seen that throughout the pandemic. Sometimes it was always the pictures in the emergency units with the gas, with the oxygen mask and so on and so forth. Maybe sometimes putting in an urgency right there. Is that something, Todd, that you would ascribe and accept as a journalist, that sometimes we are part of the problem?
Oh, we're definitely part of the problem. There's no question about it. The pressure from editors and the commercial side of the business is enormous. We have to get viewers and users and readers, and that's how the business goes forward. So certainly the whole system needs to be looked at. But if you're a television executive, if you're a media executive, which I now am, and you can't get people to watch your product, you don't have a business. So the pressure on journalists is enormous. It's much greater, I think, today than when I was a reporter, because there are so many different sources, so many different options for people to get their information. So again, the pressure is enormous, and I don't personally have the answer to that. I mean, I could sit here and say, well, journalists have to be more responsible, and they have to, double and triple and quadruple check things. But, when you have social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter who can beat you on a story, like the George Floyd murder, a citizen journalist who can get video that the professionals can't get, then you're in real trouble as a news brand, and these news brands won't survive if they can't compete with these other options.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for the honesty. I mean, we are here at the end of the day at the forum, at the media forum, and media is, of course, a business at the end of the day. If Bloomberg doesn't find its customers, or New York Times, or CNN, then we have a problem. And as much as they may have ideologically loathed Donald Trump, I'm talking about the New York Times or CNN, they probably miss him very much from a business point of view. Kjell?
Well, Ali, when we discuss financing and money and the commercial things of the media, there's another problem, and that is programmatic advertising. And programmatic advertising, by the way, is the automatic buying of and selling of online advertising. But where am I going with this? Some of the ad dollars of reached fake sites, fake news sites. You remember 2016, Macedonia, the city of Veles. They collected a lot of funds, and really the problem is that this kind of money should have gone to the real news outlets.
Thank you so much. Pointing it out from an international sales director, once again getting that perspective. We have approximately 10 minutes left. We have time for one last online question.
The second online question is, do you think media is reflecting public opinion or shaping it?
Oh, very interesting. That is indeed a very, very, at the end of the day, what we've been accused of is, of course, rather the latter, that we are shaping it rather than reflecting it. Kseniya, I think that's an accusation that sometimes perhaps
I think it's shaping it, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's a big concern. Why I'm speaking English? I don't know.
I like it, by the way. It's,
Именно это является огромным.
This is a big problem. Personally, for myself, this is a big problem. I see what is going on in the world, I have this idea. I see that the world is growing radically leftist, particularly United States of America. I've always been a great fan of United States. I was watching a lot of American TV. American journalism is something that always inspired me. That's why I feel sad when I observe what is going on in America today. So my key thought is it is easy to manipulate with the public opinion. It is easy to offer something to people that they will comprehend easily, something that does not require a lot of labor, something that does not require a lot of intellectual effort. So what is my idea? Today, all major American universities, and we know that graduates from those universities constitute the global elite. And the American system of universities is the best in the world. So all those universities are leftist and liberal, radically liberal. This is quite a natural process. You see, we are forming a very leftist, a very liberal, passionary environment to the merit of those universities. So it is a great surprise to me that many rich people in the United States of America share neoconservatism, not to mention Donald Trump. I'm talking about healthy neoconservatism, and that position is being defeated in all fronts. As far as I know, there are no major US universities that would be promoting neoconservatism. The whole academic system is based on leftist liberalism. This is the main concept for the whole world. All mass media are tied up to that principle. All main sources of information operate in accordance to that principle, and that forms the mentality and consciousness of the people. I'm not against it, but I want things to be kept objectively. I want some counterbalance. So to my mind, one of the most serious projects would be a very serious, reputable academic institution that would promote a slightly different ideology.
Ahmet, the question, of course, is a very interesting one, whether we are reflecting public opinion or we are shaping it. I think none of us can escape the fact, neither here on stage or in the audience, I'm looking at very prestigious journalists here, that we have power. I think that is understood. We have power to shape public influence, and we do shape power. Is that something, Ahmet, that you're mindful of? This is, of course, power always comes with great responsibilities as well.
We have, yes, so many responsibilities. I believe transparency, open data literacy, and digital technology literacy. It's a responsibility for audience as well, and are the most important steps to prevent disinformation, manipulation, and information pollution. World is being dragged into the more and more complex, asymmetrical digital wars, social media wars. Yes, we have a big responsibility to handle it.
Todd, that is quite a balance, right? To have that influence, to have that power at the same time running a business, at the same time having to be truthful, shying away from sensationalism. Does it get tricky sometimes? I can't hear you, unfortunately. Your mic is turned off.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's very tricky, and it's a huge responsibility, as you pointed out. And in a lot of ways, the power that journalists have also makes their jobs very dangerous, because they have this power, and governments in many parts of the world, in most parts of the world, can't control what goes out on the airwaves or what is printed. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's very, very difficult to balance the editorial intricacies of editorial coverage and balancing that, and then also the pressure from the business side, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were at ABC News, which belonged, of course, to Disney, I remember there were a couple of stories where indeed it got tricky, where you compromise the business and the content. Sergey, you wanted to chime in.
На вопрос, формируем или отражаем.
Do we shape or do we reflect? My answer would be as follows. Everything depends on your mission and your tasks. If your task may be cascaded down to you by your boss, or it may source out from your interior belief. If your objective is to reflect, you reflect. If your objective is to influence, then you do so. This is it.
Я тоже хотела добавить.
Yes, I also wanted to add. I came to journalism more than 20 years ago, quite a period. And my teachers who were introducing me into profession, they were telling me that we must bring up the audience. We must not go down to the level of the audience. We must establish our own margin, and we must drag the audience into the happy future. But those were different times. You know, today the world is topsy-turvy. If today we want to educate and enlighten our audience, we will be losing. Absolutely. Because people do not want to be enlightened and educated anymore. The responsibility of media is not to go down to the level of the street crowd, not to go far way too primitive. Our objective is to be flexible. In some cases, we must encourage our audience to work its levels up. But at the same time, we have our own commercial considerations, our business considerations. To my mind, our trail is that of diplomacy. Sometimes we must meet the expectations of the audience. Sometimes we have to follow the ratings. But the imperative thing.
Session, of course, titled A Lot of Information, Little Truth. I think I speak for all when I say this has been an increasingly and very, very content-rich panel, as was expected with such a seasoned panel. And it was also expected that, of course, it's very difficult in the time span of 90 minutes to come to a conclusion. But I think many of the elements that we have discussed today make up part of the answer, not the full answer. But Kjell, in the dying minutes, perhaps we can leave our audience with a positive taste in their mouth, perhaps with a positive feeling. What, despite the difficulties and obstacles and complicated matters that we've talked about, what gives you hope that at the end of the day, journalism will prevail?
That is a good question. Now, I'm not a journalist. Obviously, I work for a news outlet. And I think what we discussed today, when it comes to social media, as so often, it's a blessing and a curse. And we are on the path, I think, in order to find ways to counter the problem of disinformation. It's going to be a long walk, but I'm optimistic that we are going to prevail at the end of the day.
A blessing and a curse. Kseniya, 60 seconds. What's despite the difficult circumstances that you also personally find yourself in, reporting on the difficult circumstances, what gives you hope? There's an inundation, overflow of information, almost hard to regulate, hard to control, but at the end of the day, something, you get up in the morning and sometimes gets you going. What gets you going?
Все-таки я, как оптимист, верю в...
I am an optimist. I believe in human mind and consciousness. That will win. My personal hope is that all this setback, all the general deterioration we are facing today is just a wave, another wave, after which the situation will turn to something cardinally different, I mean to the best. I think we will have better mass media. I think we will have better quality streams of information, and people's attitude will change. Of course, that trail might be painful, but by means of that pain, by means of the forum, likewise we are having today, we will seek out and locate the proper balance of all the nuances. We will find the equilibrium. We will make the world slightly smarter and cleverer. Thank you.
Sessions like these definitely help to shed some light, especially when we're coming from so many different cultural backgrounds and professional environments. It's interesting to hear the different point of views and learn from them as well. Ahmet, your final remarks. You're also operating under not the easiest circumstances sometimes. What still, despite the convoluted information highway that is out there, what still gives you hope as a journalist?
We need a human resource to the educated journalists. That's the first point that I want to show. And the second one is media literacy. That will be completed together. And then I believe I'm optimistic for near future actually. But we have to need a good human resource for journalism.
Absolutely. Anastasia, you sounded not pessimistic, but you were clear that something needs to be done in terms of regulation, in terms of the word censorship sometimes was floated here and mentioned. You're an award-winning journalist, and obviously something is motivating you every day to get up and do the work. What is it?
Well, let's start from the fact that when I came to journalism, I was 18, and my ambition was to change the world, to make it better. It's been many years now. Of course, my passion has gone down a little bit because I'm aging, but ourselves, journalists, we're making the world better. If we're helping a small man, if we're resolving a little problem, if we're exposing a petty problem, that is changing the world. As to today's topic of today's discussion, it seems to me, it appears to me that never shall we have such a situation when fake news shall be gone forever. But ourselves as human beings, we know how to adapt. 2 years ago, we couldn't imagine a situation with the pandemic. We would never think we would live in apocalyptic conditions, but we adapted ourselves. We are proceeding our normal existence. I think the relations between fake news and journalism shall be the same. Both will learn how to survive.
You pointed out this infodemic that we are facing, very much perhaps like the pandemic is never going to go away entirely. It's just a matter of how we're going to adjust to it and learn to live with it. Final remarks from London. Todd, I know, having known you for over 2 decades, I know you're as passionate a journalist as they come, so I don't have to ask you what motivates you. But still, I think, and this discussion has clearly brought this to the forefront, these are complicated times for journalists.
Yeah, very complicated times. Look, as you said, I'm very passionate. I go to bed every night. I wake up in the morning. The first thing I want to know is what happened in some country in the world that maybe I've never been to, or that's 4 or 5 time zones away. I'm optimistic because right now we're in a period of transition. It's not much different than the period of transition we had from, say, newspapers to radio, then to television. And so we're just trying to figure out this digital media thing that goes into social media. And I think eventually we'll figure out the business model so that we can do things responsibly. I think there'll be some regulation of the social media platforms. I think everything will work itself out. But right now, I do agree that we are in a period of turbulence that needs to be, analyzed and thought about in a very specific way.
Everything will work itself out at the end. Final remarks, final words from Sergey.
I've been working on television for the last 14 years. Television is the thing where every day is a new day. Nobody cares about your yesterday's successes and ratings. Everyone cares about how you behave and operate today. I have gotten used to that. That's why my view into the future is optimistic. Governments, lawyers, they will find ways to regulate the social media. This is taking place in Australia, in Russia. Currently, Kazakhstan is preparing its own legislation. It will take place. Take it from me. Things will be okay, believe me, you.
Take that wind of positivity that you have provided, not just you, but everyone. A lot of information, little truth, ladies and gentlemen. I can only speak for myself. There was a lot of information and a lot of truth that I've heard here today on stage from our speakers here in Nur Sultan and London. Fascinating discussion. Fascinating. You're all coming from very different countries, different cultures, different challenges, but at the end of the day, I think what unifies us is the belief that we do want to perform and produce quality journalism out there in order to educate Anastasia and educate the public better, especially in complicated times like these. This wraps up this very informative, very lively session. Thank you so much. And Todd, Anastasia, Kjell, Ahmet, Kseniya, and Sergey, this is your applause. Thank you so much.